In the dusty village of Umudim, hunger had carved deep lines into the faces of its children. It was a place where the rooster's crow wasn't a wake-up call, but a reminder of another day without enough food. In one mud hut on the edge of the village, a frail girl named Ngozi sat on the cracked floor, her ribs pushing through her skin like a xylophone. Her mother, Mama Ibube, a widow with no land or livestock, had tried everything, fetching firewood, washing clothes for others, but the hunger kept winning. When the strange man from the city came offering money in exchange for Ngozi's help as a maid, Mama Ibube wept. But with 5 mouths to feed, she gave in to the devil's bargain and handed over her daughter's small hand with trembling fingers. The man, wearing polished shoes that crushed the dry earth like pride, gave her some crumpled naira notes and told her not to worry. He promised Ngozi would live in a big house in Lagos, where she'd eat meat every day and sleep on a mattress. The villagers whispered as the pickup truck drove off, leaving a cloud of red dust and a mother staring into the distance, wondering if she had just sold her daughter to a better life or to her doom. As the truck disappeared behind the hills, little did anyone know that what lay ahead wasn't just a new life, but a secret that would shatter everything. The city was louder than Ngozi had imagined. Cars screamed like angry spirits, buildings stood like proud giants, and people moved like they had fire under their feet. The mansion she arrived at was like something from a dream. Marble floors, golden railings, fountains spitting water like snakes, and walls that touched the clouds. But within that grandeur, Ngozi felt smaller than ever. The house belonged to the Okafor family, known for their wealth and silence. They never asked questions, and people rarely dared to knock on their high black gates. Madame Okafor, the matriarch, stood tall and cold, her beauty hardened by years of secrets. She eyed Ngozi like a stray puppy, worth feeding, but not cuddling. "From now on, your name is Blessing," she said, as if washing away Ngozi's past with a word. The child nodded, scared to breathe too loud. Her room was a tiny space near the backyard, without windows or fan, while the rest of the house glowed with chandeliers and cool air. But Ngozi wasn't just stepping into a mansion. She had walked unknowingly into a storm where identity, bloodlines, and betrayal simmered beneath expensive rugs and smiling portraits. From the moment she arrived, Madame Okafor would often stare at Ngozi with an odd kind of intensity, like she was trying to read her soul. At first, Ngozi thought it was suspicion, but soon she noticed Madame's fingers twitching, her voice trembling slightly whenever she scolded her. "Clean the table properly, Blessing," she would say, but then trail off into silence, her eyes clouded by thoughts that never made it to her lips. It was as though Ngozi reminded her of something, or someone. The other maids, mostly older women, avoided eye contact with Ngozi. They warned her not to ask questions, not to wander upstairs, and never to enter the study room. "That room holds ghosts," one whispered. But the real ghost in the house wasn't in the study, it was in Madame's heart. Every time Ngozi laughed softly or tied her wrapper a certain way, something flickered in Madame's expression, something between recognition and fear. One hot afternoon while scrubbing the veranda, Ngozi found something glinting between the flower pots, a golden necklace with a tiny N carved into the locket. Curious, she slipped it into her wrapper. That night, while hiding from the cook's angry yells, she opened the locket and saw a faded photo inside, a smiling baby with deep dimples and eyes just like hers. Her heart pounded. Could this be a coincidence? She hid the necklace in her tiny pillow and promised not to tell anyone. But fate had other plans. The next morning, Madame Okafor stormed through the corridors like a woman possessed. "My necklace! Someone took it!" Her voice cracked like thunder. Guards searched the house, but no one dared point fingers. Ngozi trembled as they approached the staff quarters. Was this just a missing necklace, or the beginning of a truth long buried? Rumors began to swirl like harmattan dust. One of the old stewards, Baba Sule, whispered to Ngozi during dinner cleanup. Madame had a daughter who died in childbirth. At least, that's what the family said. But his eyes darted nervously. They say the baby disappeared before the burial. Ngozi's fingers froze on the wet plate she was washing. Could the photo in the locket be that missing baby? The weight of the necklace became heavier by the minute. She began having dreams, strange ones where a woman who looked like Madam would cry and call her Nena, a name she didn't recognize. In the dream, she was held tightly to a chest that smelled of hibiscus and wealth, as if someone had loved her once, deeply and fiercely. Ngozi started to wonder, who was she really? And why had her presence unsettled a house that was supposed to forget? As the weeks rolled into months, Ngozi became a silent observer in the mansion. But one day, she made a mistake. She accidentally broke a porcelain teacup while serving guests. Madame Okafor slapped her across the face so hard that her ears rang for minutes. "You're not special. You're just a servant girl," she barked, but her voice cracked midway. She stormed out, leaving the guests staring awkwardly, unsure of whether to intervene or pretend nothing had happened. Later that night, Mr. Okafor came into the kitchen, something he rarely did. He asked Ngozi softly, "Where are you from?" When she said Umudim, his eyes widened slightly. "That's where," he mumbled, but stopped himself. He nodded slowly and left without another word. For the first time, Ngozi saw fear not just in her own heart, but in the eyes of the rich too. One day, while dusting the upper floor, Ngozi accidentally opened a door that had always been locked. Inside was a room frozen in time, baby clothes folded neatly, a crib untouched, and photos of a baby girl labeled Nena O. Kafour, born 2012. Her heart raced as she looked at one of the photos. The baby had her nose, her ears, her dimples, her eyes. Could it be her? Suddenly, Madame Okafor appeared at the door. Her face turned pale. "Why are you here?" she shouted. But before Ngozi could answer, Madame stepped into the room, sank to her knees, and began to weep. Deep, guttural sobs that shook the very foundation of the house. "They told me you died," she whispered, not to Ngozi, but to the air, to a ghost she had loved and lost. Late that night, Ngozi couldn't sleep. The room kept flashing in her mind, especially the name Nena. She returned to the room the next morning while everyone was out. Inside the bottom drawer of the wardrobe, she found a faded envelope sealed in wax. Inside was a letter from a midwife at the private hospital where Madame had given birth. It read, "Baby survived, but Madame was unconscious. The father asked me to handle things. I did as he said. May God forgive me." Tears filled Ngozi's eyes. If what the letter said was true, someone had taken her away deliberately. But why? Who had lied? And more importantly, what were they trying to hide? When Madame Okafor caught Ngozi with the letter, her body shook violently. But instead of anger, she collapsed on the floor sobbing. "You were never supposed to see this. I was told you died. I mourned you. For years I lit candles and prayed by your empty crib." Mr. Okafor entered the room, saw the scene, and slowly confessed. I couldn't risk a scandal. My family would have destroyed you both, so I lied. I gave you to a nurse, told her to take you far away." Ngozi stood still, frozen. Her heart was breaking and healing at the same time. Everything she thought she knew, her village life, her identity, was shattered. But somewhere in that chaos, a seed of truth had been planted, and now it was growing. To be sure, Madame Okafor demanded a DNA test. Samples were taken in silence. For days, the house stood still. No one dared speak too loud. Ngozi sat in the garden often, holding the necklace, praying to ancestors she had never met to reveal the truth. When the test finally arrived, the results screamed from the paper, 99.9% match. Ngozi wasn't just a maid. She was blood. She was Nena Okafor, the daughter thought dead, the child stolen by lies, the truth buried by fear. And now that the truth had surfaced, no one in that house would ever be the same again. The day the DNA results were revealed, the mansion was wrapped in silence. Madame Okafor walked slowly to Ngozi's small room, where she sat trembling. With tears in her eyes, Madame knelt and said, "My child, Nena, forgive me." Ngozi didn't know how to respond. All her life, she had been called a maid, shouted at, starved of love. And now, this same woman, her mother, was on her knees before her. It was not the reunion one sees in movies, full of hugs and joy. It was messy, painful and full of questions. But Ngozi's heart, though battered, recognized the truth. She fell into Madam's arms, and both wept like mother and child long separated by war. Mr. Okafor watched from the doorway, his face as unreadable as stone. The truth had undone the web of control he had built. He tried to defend his past actions, saying he only wanted to protect the family's reputation. But Ngozi didn't need his justification. She needed her identity. That night, Madam entered the room where the golden nameplate, Nena's room, still hung on the door. She took Ngozi by the hand and said, "This room is yours. It always was." The girl once called Blessing reclaimed her true name. She was no longer a servant. She was a Nena Okafor, heir to a legacy of pain and hope. Despite the DNA confirmation, not everyone in the Okafor mansion welcomed Nena's return. The older children, Obinna and Adaora, Madam's stepchildren, saw her as a threat. Obinna, who had grown up with the promise of inheriting the family estate, was suddenly not the only true child anymore. He started treating Nena with cold silence, while Adaora mocked her clothes and accent. "Just because you're our sister doesn't mean you belong here," she sneered one morning, tossing Nena's wrapper aside. Nena felt like a stranger in a palace. She had slept on bare floors and eaten from broken plates for most of her life. Now she had to learn how to use forks, speak in polished English, and walk like a lady. Madam tried her best to guide her, but the distance between poverty and privilege was not crossed in a day. She missed her mother in the village. She missed the sound of pestles pounding yam in the evening. Riches, she realized, could be just as lonely as hunger. After weeks of internal conflict, Nena begged Madam to let her return to Umudim, to see the woman who raised her, who sold her out of desperation. Madam hesitated, afraid of losing her again. But she finally agreed, sending a convoy of black jeeps into the village that had once sold a child. When the vehicles arrived, dust swirled in the air like spirits dancing. Villagers gathered in awe as Nena stepped out, wearing fine lace and golden bangles, her eyes scanning for a familiar face. Mama Ibube came out slowly, leaning on a stick. When she saw Nena, she fell to her knees, crying. "Forgive me," she whispered, her voice cracking. Nena rushed to her and knelt too. "You gave me away, but you also saved me," she replied. The two embraced, and the entire village wept. In that moment, the distance between wealth and poverty disappeared. It was a reunion of love, pain, and acceptance, one that the ancestors surely witnessed from beyond the baobab trees. As the village celebrated her return, Nena noticed something strange. Some elders were uncomfortable, whispering behind their kola nuts and bitter leaf. Later that night, an old woman named Mama Njideka came to Nena's hut. "You're not the first child to vanish from this village," she whispered. "There was a time when rich families took babies from here like traders at a market. You must dig deeper." Nena's heart skipped. The story wasn't just about her anymore. It was bigger than the Okafors and Umudim. It was about a system, a tradition of silence, of exploitation hidden behind the mask of opportunity. Nena took out the necklace once more. It no longer felt like an heirloom. It felt like a key to doors that had been locked for decades. She promised Mama Njideka, "I will uncover every secret, not just for me, but for every girl who was taken." Back in Lagos, Nena snuck into her father's study, the forbidden room. It was late, and only the crickets kept her company. Behind a bookshelf, she found a hidden compartment containing a dusty, leather-bound ledger. Inside were names, birth dates, and amounts paid, rows and rows of transactions. One column was titled Adoptions, another labeled Transfers. Her name was there too. Baby N. Umudim, 250,000. Her hands trembled as she turned each page. There were dozens of names, including children from other villages. Her father had run something far worse than a lie. He had run a network of baby trades disguised as private adoptions. Nena's blood went cold. The man she once called Daddy had bought her like a goat. The walls of the mansion seemed to close in on her, whispering, accusing. Madame Okafor, who had been glowing with the joy of reunion, shattered when she learned the truth about the ledger. She confronted her husband in front of the family, holding the book like a weapon. "You lied to me. You sold our baby and bought silence." Mr. Okafor stood speechless, finally exposed. It was business. he muttered. "You were too weak to handle the scandal. I did what I had to do." Madam slapped him hard. "You destroyed me," she screamed. "I lit candles for a child you were hiding in your own trap." Her sobs echoed through the mansion. Adaora and Obinna stood frozen, their own foundations cracking. For years, they had lived in luxury built on shadows. Now, those shadows had names, and Nena was leading them into the light. Nena, driven by grief and fire, contacted a human rights lawyer. Together, they started building a case, not just against her father, but the entire illegal network of child trading that had thrived under silence. News spread quickly. TV stations picked up the story. Heiress speaks out against father's baby trade empire. The mansion became a battlefield. Police came with warrants. The neighbors stopped smiling. Mr. Okafor was arrested and taken away in handcuffs. Nena watched from the balcony, not with joy, but with sorrow. He was still her father, the man who once tucked her in at night, even if it was all based on a lie. But justice, she knew, must be stronger than blood. Her tears fell silently, not from hatred, but from heartbreak. As the trial unfolded, other young women began to come forward, girls from villages in Anambra, Enugu, Delta. Some had been adopted by foreigners, others by rich Nigerians who renamed them and erased their pasts. Many of them had grown up like Nena, thinking they were born to serve. Now they stood together like a forest rising. Nena formed a foundation called Daughters of the Dust, aimed at reuniting lost children with their families and exposing those still involved in illegal adoptions. Madame Okafor became the foundation's patron, donating land and resources. It was her way of redeeming herself. "Let no other woman bury a child who still breathes," she said at the launch event, her voice breaking but strong. Despite her rising fame, Nena often returned to Umudim. She built a school there, named Ibube Hope Academy, in honor of the mother who gave her away to save her. Mama Ibube became a local hero, her story told to every girl who walked barefoot to school. Nena sat with her often, both of them shelling groundnuts under the baobab tree, laughing at the twists of fate. Though she lived in mansions and met with governors, Nena felt most alive in Umudim, in the scent of red earth, in the sound of goats bleating, and in the prayers of grateful villagers. Her name had changed, her life had changed, but her heart remained grounded in the soil that once birthed her. One day, during a storm, Nena stood outside the mansion, barefoot, letting the rain soak her. She closed her eyes and remembered the girl who scrubbed floors, cried into thin pillows, and dreamed of being seen. That girl had survived. That girl had become a warrior. She turned toward the sky and whispered, "I found myself." Behind her, Madame Okafor joined her in the rain. Two women, once strangers, now family, stood together under the weeping heavens. The past could not be changed, but the future they knew could be rewritten, with truth, with courage, and with love. When a prominent TV journalist requested an exclusive interview with Nena, the family hesitated, but Madame Okafor insisted. The truth must be told. No more silence. The studio was filled with lights, cameras, and tension. Dressed in traditional Ankara with koa, ral beads, Nena sat poised and firm. The interviewer asked about everything, from her days as a maid to the day she discovered the DNA truth. Her answers were raw, honest, and soaked in emotion. Millions across Nigeria watched that night. Women cried in their sitting rooms. Men shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. Elders from remote villages gathered by radio sets. For the first time, a child once buried by shame had become a voice for justice. At the end of the interview, Nena looked into the camera and said, "I'm not just a daughter of the Okafors. I'm a daughter of every mother who ever had to choose between poverty and sacrifice." The nation listened, and it wept. While the country praised Nena, her stepbrother Obinna was consumed by anger. Once heir to the Okafor estate, he now felt sidelined, forgotten. He accused Madame of favoritism. "You're replacing me with a village girl," he shouted. "She's not even your real daughter. She was gone for years. I stayed." But his words bounced off walls that had heard too many lies. One night, Obinna stormed into Nena's room, slamming the door shut. You ruined everything, he growled. We were happy before you came. Nena stood her ground. Were you happy living a lie? She asked. The tension was thick, but instead of escalating, something broke in Obina. He sank to the floor, tears in his eyes. I don't know who I am anymore, he confessed. For the first time, they saw each other not as enemies, but as children shaped by a broken system. Healing, Nena realized, sometimes begins with pain. The trial against Mr. Okafor began in a packed courtroom. Witnesses came forward, midwives, nurses, even an old driver who had delivered babies from village to city. The judge, a sharp woman with a stern face, listened carefully. Mr. Okafor's lawyer tried to dismiss the case as a family misunderstanding, but the evidence told a different story. The ledger, the adoption papers, the confessions. Nena testified too, her voice steady. He bought me, lied to my mother, lied to my birth mother, built a life on a foundation of stolen lives. The courtroom was silent. Even Mr. Okafor, once arrogant and proud, looked down in shame. The judge promised a fair verdict, but warned that justice was not always quick. This is not just about law, she said, but about morality, about how we treat the most vulnerable among us. One afternoon, Nena received a call from a woman in London. Her name was Ifunanya, and she claimed to be another child trafficked through the same network. I was taken from a village near yours in 2010, she said. I saw your story. It's my story too. They spoke for hours. Ifunanya had grown up believing she was adopted legally by a British couple, but doubts and dreams had haunted her. Nena invited her to Nigeria. When she arrived, they hugged like lost sisters. Though they had different mothers, their pain was the same. They lit candles for the mothers who had lost them, for the midwives who had lied, and for the ancestors who had watched it all unfold. The bond they shared was not of blood, but of survival, and they vowed to find more like them. Back in Umudim, Mama Ebube's health began to decline. The years of hardship had taken their toll. Nena rushed to her side, staying in the small mud house despite the mansion waiting in Lagos. I'm proud of you, my child, Mama Ebube whispered one night. You turned my mistake into a blessing. They held hands as the moon rose, and the air was thick with unspoken words. One morning, Mama Ebube didn't wake up. She passed on in her sleep, peaceful and with a smile on her face. Nena buried her beneath the baobab tree, where they had once shelled ground nuts and laughed. The entire village came to mourn and to honor the woman who had once sold a child but left behind a legacy of truth. Nena cried like a child again, not for herself, but for the woman who gave her life twice. Adaora, Madam's stepdaughter, had always felt overshadowed, first by Obina, now by Nena. She began spreading rumors, claiming Nena was manipulating the family for fame and money. She accused her of playing the victim and resented the media attention. She's not even rich, Adaora sneered to her friends. She's just a glorified house girl. But her words backfired. The staff, the villagers, and even strangers online defended Nena. She earned her place with truth, one housemaid said. Not like some of us who grew up with gold and gave back nothing. Even Madame Okafor, once distant with Adaora, stood by Nena. If jealousy is your only answer to pain, she told her, then you've already lost. Inspired by Nena's story, a lawmaker proposed a bill to regulate all private adoptions and criminalize baby trafficking under stricter laws. The Daughters of the Dust Bill was debated in Parliament. Some politicians resisted, calling it too emotional, but others pushed forward. They cited not only Nena's case, but also dozens of uncovered stories. Nena was invited to speak. She stood in front of the lawmakers in a wrapper woven by village women and said, "Every child sold is a future stolen. You cannot buy the destiny of a child and expect peace." Her speech went viral. The bill passed its first reading. For the first time in Nigeria's history, the voiceless were heard in the halls of power. The judge called the courtroom to order. After months of evidence, testimonies, and tears, the verdict was finally delivered. Mr. Okafor was found guilty of child trafficking, falsification of records, and obstruction of justice. He was sentenced to 25 years in prison. The courtroom gasped. Some clapped, others wept. Nena sat in silence. Madam held her hand, crying openly. Mr. Okafor didn't look at them as he was taken away. Nena stood as he passed by and said softly, "I forgive you, but I will never forget." It was not triumph she felt, but release, like chains finally falling off the ankles of every girl who had once been sold. Months passed. Nena transformed the old Okafor estate into a shelter for rescued girls. They came from all over, Benue, Osun, Kano, even from other countries. The place was renamed House of Nena. There were classrooms, workshops, dance halls, and a healing garden. Each girl was given not just food, but dignity. Madame Okafor became Mama Nena to many. Even Adora, with time, came around. She started volunteering, reading to the younger girls, and organizing fundraising events. The family that had once been broken was being rebuilt, not on secrets, but on service. Nena watched it all quietly, her heart full. Her pain had become her purpose. One evening, Nena returned to Umudim alone. She sat beneath the baobab tree where her journey had begun. The wind whispered through the leaves like voices from the past. She closed her eyes and listened. "You are not what they called you," it seemed to say. "You are what you chose to become." She smiled, not because life was perfect, but because she had survived it. The poor maid had become a daughter, then a fighter, then a mother to many. The tree stood still, but she had moved forward. And now, she had returned not to hide, but to honor the journey that turned her name into a symbol of hope. As the house of Nena grew, more girls arrived, each carrying her own ghost. One night, a quiet girl named Zuwaira arrived from the north. She barely spoke, flinching at every sound. Nena sat with her for hours under the moonlight, offering roasted ground nuts and warm water. "They sold me after my father died," Zuwaira whispered. "They said I was too much trouble." Her voice was dry, like the Harmattan wind. That night, Nena cried quietly. Each story reopened her own wounds, yet with every pain shared, she grew stronger. "Our past is a scar, not a curse," she told Zuwaira the next morning. The girl nodded, slowly beginning to smile. The mansion that once held secrets now held healing. Walls that echoed with silence were now alive with drumming, dancing, and the sound of girls rediscovering joy. Months after the trial, Obinna returned from abroad. He had traveled to clear his mind, shaken by the collapse of everything he thought was true. When he entered the mansion, he found Nena teaching the girls how to tie Jeel headscarves. He watched quietly from the doorway, then stepped in. "Nena," he said. She turned, unsure of his tone. "I was wrong," he continued. "You never ruined the family. You saved it." He reached into his bag and handed her a framed photo of Mama Ebube and Nena together. "I found it in a newspaper archive. I thought you should have it." The two embraced, not out of obligation but out of growth. A brother who once saw her as a rival now saw her as blood. Forgiveness had become the family's true inheritance. To celebrate the healing journey of the girls, Nena organized a tree planting ceremony. Each girl planted a tree in her name: mango, orange, guava, and even the sacred baobab. "Let these roots remind us that though we were scattered, we belong to this soil," Nena declared. The girls danced in their colorful wrappers, feet kicking up joy and dust. The final tree planted was named Ibubi's tree, in honor of the woman who gave everything for her child. As the last seedling was lowered into the earth, drummers played softly and villagers from near and far joined in. It wasn't just a celebration, it was a statement. Lost daughters had returned, not as victims, but as leaders. Just as life was blossoming again, Madame Okafor's health took a turn. Ors diagnosed her with a rare heart condition. She had spent years carrying grief and guilt, and her body now bore the cost. Nena rushed her to the best hospital, but doctors said rest was the only medicine that might help. Madame asked to return home, to the mansion that now buzzed with children's laughter. There, Nena cared for her like a true daughter, preparing her herbs, feeding her with her own hands, and telling her stories by candlelight. Madame often whispered, "I don't deserve this kindness." But Nena always replied, "You're not who you were. You chose better." In her final months, Madame knew peace, and in Nena's arms, she found the forgiveness she never thought possible. When Madame Okafor passed, the whole country mourned. Not for the wealth she once carried, but for the grace she showed in her final years. Her funeral was grand, but rooted in humility. The girls of the house of Nena carried her casket, wrapped in white lace. Nena gave a heartfelt eulogy. She was not perfect, but she was brave enough to change. After the ceremony, Nena sat under Madam's favorite hibiscus tree. Obinna joined her, holding a bowl of pepper soup. She said you were her second chance, he murmured. Nena smiled. We were each other's. The earth had taken back one of its daughters, but her legacy now lived in the voices of dozens of girls who had learned to speak, sing, and survive. Nena launched a cultural festival called the Festival of Daughters, inviting girls and women from all over the continent to share their stories. There were dances from Kenya, songs from Ghana, poems from Ethiopia, and drumming from Senegal. Mothers, daughters, and grandmothers held hands and celebrated life. At the center of the festival was a storytelling fire. One by one, girls stood and spoke. I was sold at 6. They changed my name. I was never hugged until I came here. Each voice, once buried, now rose like a bird in flight. When it was Nena's turn, she stood barefoot in her wrapper, her head held high. I was once forgotten, she said, but I have found every girl I ever was, inside each of you. With growing support, Nena dreamed of building a proper school, not just for rescued girls, but for all village children who had no access to learning. She wanted classrooms with chalkboards, desks made by local carpenters, and libraries filled with African literature. Our children must know who they are, she told the architect. Construction began, and the community joined in. Women cooked for the workers. Men helped lay bricks. Even the girls carried water and painted murals. When the school opened, it bore a proud name, the Nena Center for Dignity and Wisdom. Its motto, etched in stone, every child is born with a name, a voice, and a right to dream. One morning, Nena received a sealed envelope bearing the national crest. Inside was a letter from the president, inviting her to serve as a special advisor on child protection. It was an honor that made the girls scream with joy. Madam would have been proud. Mama Ebube would have danced barefoot. When she arrived at the State House, dressed in aso oke and beads, journalists swarmed, but Nena didn't smile for cameras. She smiled because she carried her ancestors with her. In the meeting room, she didn't speak English first. She greeted them in her native tongue. Ndewo, I speak for those you never heard. The room fell silent. Power had come full circle, from the maid's quarters to the corridors of government. Ifunanya, now living in Nigeria, visited the house of Nena often. This time she brought news. I found my birth mother, she said tearfully. She thought I was dead. Nena hugged her like a sister. They sat in the courtyard, drinking zobo and sharing memories. Do you ever stop hurting? Ifunanya asked. Nena nodded. You never stop hurting, but you learn to live beyond it. That night, they organized a candlelight vigil for all the girls still missing, whose stories remained unheard. Dozens of girls held candles under the stars. Names were read, prayers were whispered, some cried, some sang, but all stood firm. We remember, they chanted. We rise. The air was filled not with sorrow, but with hope. Years passed. Nena had traveled the world, spoken at summits, published books, changed laws. But one quiet afternoon, she returned alone to her roots. She sat again beneath the baobab tree, now grown thicker and stronger. Children played nearby, and a girl skipped past humming an old lullaby. Nena closed her eyes and smiled. She was no longer the maid, no longer just the daughter of secrets. She was the woman who turned pain into power, silence into voice, and suffering into sanctuary. She rested her back against the tree, whispering, I am home. The wind rustled the leaves in reply, and the story continued, carried on the breeze, into the hearts of those who would come next. Among the newest arrivals at the house of Nena was a little girl with bright eyes and a scar across her cheek. She spoke little and called herself Tomorrow, refusing to reveal her real name. She had been found at a bus terminal in Abuja, clutching a piece of paper with Nena's name scrawled across it. When Nena knelt to meet her, the girl whispered, They said you save girls like me. Tomorrow barely ate. She flinched at loud noises, but she clung to Nena like a lifeline. Slowly, with gentle storytelling, dance classes, and the soft hands of older girls brushing her hair, Tomorrow began to open up. Her laughter returned in pieces. Why do you call yourself Tomorrow? Nena asked one evening. The girl replied, "Because yesterday tried to kill me and today scares me. But tomorrow might be better." Nena held her close. "Then we'll build tomorrow together." Adeora, once filled with envy and bitterness, had transformed. She now spent her days mentoring girls in fashion and etiquette, and her nights writing a memoir titled The Sister I Didn't See. One evening, she confessed to Nena, "I hated you because I was broken. I thought you stole what was mine. But truth is, you were what we all needed." Adeora's growth shocked many in the family. She stopped chasing society parties and focused on advocacy. "This place," she said, referring to the house, "healed me too." At a fundraising gala, she stood proudly beside Nena, introducing her as my sister, my compass, my reminder that love is louder than bloodlines. Their bond now reflected the power of healing, how even the most damaged relationships can blossom with time, humility, and truth. The foundation invited fathers, brothers, and husbands to a forum called When Men Listen, a groundbreaking event where men were asked not to speak, but to simply hear the testimonies of survivors. Chiefs, businessmen, students, and clergy sat in silence as girl after girl stepped forward. One told how her uncle sold her at 7. Another wept as she described being told she was lucky to work in a house where she was barely fed. There was no shouting, just the sound of truth. Some men cried, some walked out, but many stayed and returned. "I never knew," one elderly chief said, eyes red. "But now that I do, I cannot remain the same." A shift began, small but real. One stormy night, an electrical fire broke out in the shelter's dormitory. Screams pierced the air. Nena, barefoot and in her wrapper, ran into the flames without hesitation. She helped carry out girls, one by one, choking on smoke. Tamara was trapped under a fallen beam, and it was Nena who lifted it with trembling hands, dragging her to safety. No lives were lost, but the damage was immense. Beds burned, walls cracked. The community rallied the next day. Carpenters, electricians, women with buckets of paint, everyone came, even strangers. "If she could run into fire for our children," a mother said, "then we can rebuild with our hands." Within weeks, the shelter was stronger than before. Tamara, now wearing bandages, stood beside Nena and said, "We don't just survive, we rise again." Nena began compiling a book of every girl who had passed through the house. Not just their new names, but the names they were born with. The names lost to slavery, trauma, and shame. "Every name is sacred," she said. The book, titled They Were Not Forgotten, became a living testimony. It was handwritten at first, each name inscribed with care. When the first copy was completed, it was placed at the entrance of the house in a glass case. Visitors would bow before it in silence. For the girls, it became a source of power. "I am in the book," one girl whispered proudly. "My story matters." And as the book grew, so did the movement. Each name added was a promise. You were seen, you were known, you will not be erased. Nena received a letter from her father, now an old man in prison. "I am dying," it said. "I ask for one thing, your eyes. Let me see forgiveness before I go." Obinna discouraged her, but Nena believed that freedom also meant freeing herself from the chains of hate. She visited him in his gray uniform, behind bars that once protected his power. Mr. Okafor looked fragile, a shadow of the man he was. He couldn't speak at first, but when he did, it wasn't a plea. It was confession. "I was wrong. I broke you, and I broke your mother. I will die with that shame." Nena nodded. "I came to tell you. I healed." He wept, and before she left, she whispered, "May your soul find the peace you denied others." That night, he died in his sleep. After years of growth, Obinna found love with Chinwe, a schoolteacher from Anambra. Their wedding was vibrant and traditional, held beneath a canopy of palm leaves and filled with uli designs, kola nuts, and Igbo proverbs. Nena danced with him, tears in her eyes. "We made it," he said. "Somehow, through the fire, we made it." During the ceremony, he acknowledged Nena publicly. "This woman," he said, pointing to her with pride, "restored our name, healed our family, and built a home out of ashes. She is my sister in blood, but more so in soul." The crowd erupted in cheers. That day, Nena didn't feel like a survivor. She felt like royalty. Despite her success, Nena struggled with one silent grief. She had never been able to conceive. Doctors said her womb had been damaged during her harsh years as a maid, possibly due to untreated infections or trauma. It was a private pain, one she didn't share often, but every time she held a baby in her arms, something in her eyes softened. One night, Tomorrow, now older, healthier, and wiser, came to her with a handmade necklace. "You may not have borne me," she said, "but you mothered me." Others joined, presenting small gifts, drawings, songs, beads. "You are our mother," they chanted. Nena wept for the cradle that remained empty, but her arms, her heart, were full beyond measure. The president of Nigeria, now an outspoken supporter of child protection, visited the house of Nena. Security was tight, cameras flashing, but Nena insisted on a humble welcome. The girls sang in local languages, drummers played. The president, moved by their stories, promised full funding for 5 more centers across the country. In his speech, he declared, "This house is not made of bricks. It is made of truth, pain, and hope. And it belongs not just to Nena, but to every child whose voice was once stolen." That evening, Nena stood on the rooftop alone, watching the sun set. She whispered, "Mama, I hope you see this. Your little girl became something after all." Nena began traveling to remote villages, speaking to mothers, traditional rulers, and market women. "Don't sell your children," she pleaded. "Don't trade them for promises of gold. Raise them with pride, no matter how little you have." She left behind not just gifts, but stories, songs, and seeds of wisdom. One day, an old woman placed her hand on Nena's shoulder and said, "You are not just a girl, you are a tree. And in every girl you touch, a seed is planted." That night, Nena wrote in her journal, "I was once a child in chains. Now I am a tree in bloom." She closed the book, ready for whatever came next, not as a survivor, but as a sower of futures. Nena sat with the house choir and helped compose a song titled Nzube, meaning destiny. The lyrics honored the children who never made it back, who remained lost in the cracks of history. "We sing not just for those rescued," Nena told the girls, "but for the ones who were forgotten by the world, yet remembered by the spirit." During the first performance, the girls wore white wrappers and stood barefoot on stage. Their voices rose like incense into the night sky. Villagers, government officials, and families wept. The melody didn't just carry grief, it carried power. It reminded everyone that even unnamed souls deserve to be mourned, honored, and loved. And through that song, their memories found a resting place. Tomorrow, once voiceless and afraid, now stood tall. At just 13, she had become the youngest girl in the house to write and perform a solo play titled, "I Am Not for Sale." She told her own story through characters, music, and movement, portraying pain, fear, escape, and rebirth. Nena sat front row, tears streaming down her cheeks. After the performance, Tomorrow bowed low and said, "I dedicate this to the woman who saw me when I couldn't see myself." The crowd roared with applause. Nena stood and long. Dee hugged her tightly. "You are the proof that we are healing," she whispered. In that moment, Nena didn't just see a survivor. She saw a leader in the making, a child turned champion. Nena created an internal democratic system called the Girls' Parliament, where older girls led committees on health, security, arts, and discipline. Elections were held, debates were organized, and everyone had a vote. "If they can govern here," Nena said, "they can govern the world." In a quiet ceremony, Nena dug a small pit behind the house and buried the ledger that had listed her sale price and the names of other stolen children. She wrapped it in cloth, tied with red thread, and dropped it into the earth. "This book began in darkness," she whispered. "Let it now return to the soil where truth can grow." The girls surrounded her, pouring libation from calabashes and singing soft chants of farewell. It wasn't just a burial, it was a release. The book had been their evidence, their proof, but now it had fulfilled its purpose. From now on, they would live not by what was written about them, but by the stories they chose to write for themselves. One day, Ifunanya received a message. Her biological father had been located. He lived in a small fishing village in Bayelsa, alone and unaware that his daughter had survived. Nena accompanied her. The journey took hours by boat and road. When they arrived, an old man with tired eyes stood in front of a thatched hut. "Are you my child?" he asked. Ifunanya nodded, trembling. "They told me you died at birth," he said, breaking down. The reunion was quiet, filled with long silences, slow embraces, and gentle storytelling. Nena watched from a distance, her heart full. One more circle had closed. One more family, torn by lies, now made whole by truth. Nena returned to the village market in Umudim, the same place where Mama Ebube had once sold her for survival. This time she came not in rags, but in dignity. Market women embraced her, singing praises and ululating in joy. "You are our story," they chanted. "Our daughter has returned." She stood on a wooden crate and addressed them. No child should be sold again. No hunger should make a mother choose between food and her baby. She announced the launch of a women's support fund, offering microloans and farming tools. "Let no mother feel she is alone." "Tears," he said. The crowd clapped. In the same market where her childhood was traded, she now planted seeds of hope. On the anniversary of Mama Ebube's passing, Nena sat under the baobab tree and wrote a letter addressed to heaven. "Dear Mama," she began, "the world tried to bury me, but you gave me the roots to rise." She wrote about the girls, the house, the battles won, and the ones still being fought. The girls joined her. Each wrote their own letter to someone they had lost. A mother, a sister, even a self that no longer existed. The letters were folded, tied to balloons, and released into the sunset. The sky filled with colors and messages floating upward like prayers. "Our hearts are still full," Nena said, "even in goodbye." The rainy season arrived early. Thunder rumbled. But this time, when the rains came, no one was afraid. The girls danced barefoot in the mud, lifted their faces to the skies, and sang songs of survival. Rain, which once reminded them of sorrow, now meant cleansing, rebirth, and blessing. Nena watched from the veranda, Tomorrow holding her hand. "I used to cry when it rained," the girl whispered. "Now I laugh." Nena nodded. "That's what healing feels like." The baobab tree swayed gently in the wind. What once stood as a witness to loss now stood as a monument to redemption. The house expanded to 5 more states: Edo, Kaduna, Cross River, Ekiti, and Borno. Each center was uniquely designed with local traditions, languages, and customs in mind. Local women ran them. Former rescued girls became mentors, counselors, and teachers. A full circle had turned. The media began calling the movement a nation of daughters. Not because they belonged to Nena, but because they belonged to each other. Each house had a baobab tree planted at its heart. And underneath those trees, stories were told. Stories of loss and finding, of sorrow and strength, of girls who became more than survivors. Years later, Nena, now in her late 50s, sat once again beneath the baobab tree in Umudim, her hair gray, her heart still young. Around her sat dozens of girls. Tomorrow was now a grown woman with daughters of her own. Obina, Adaora, and Ifunanya all visited regularly. The tree had grown so tall it touched the sky. She opened her final journal and wrote, "The S is where it began, this is where it was broken, and this is where we healed." One of the girls leaned in and asked, "Mama Nena, can you tell us the story again?" She smiled, closed the journal, and nodded. "Yes, my child, sit close. Let me tell you what happens when a poor girl, sold as a maid, finds her true name. And beneath the baobab tree, the story lived on, forever."